so much for joining me in Wellington today. You've had a big week. The Prime Minister ruling out working with you if he were to form a coalition government at the next election. What does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think it's premature that they've done this whole ruling out thing, and it's just indicative of old school politics, trying to paint people in a left or a right box when actually it's more complex than that, and we need to work together on some of these solutions. I think if they need us to form a government, then no one really questions that he will pick up the phone and have that conversation. There is actually a lot that we agree with them on, and I think we can work constructively on.
There's been 3 policies that the National Party have focused on: your universal basic income, the land tax, and also the age of the youth court. That one. Can you just tell me how would, in any world, that fit into a right-wing government?
So the tax policy, I think there's a bit of misunderstanding perhaps, or he did say he had a cursory glance only, so perhaps hasn't actually read the detail. That tax policy, if enacted in full, would result in a tax cut for 70% of New Zealanders. And that's something that National campaigned on last election. So our objective with the tax policy is to broaden the tax base, make our economy more resilient, help people take home more of their hard-earned pay from work by shifting some of the burden onto property. For lots of people, that will just be a tax switch, so they'll pay a bit more in their land tax, but they'll also receive more from their income tax through the citizens' income. So I think if we can sit down and actually have a proper conversation around what we're trying to achieve, we're not naive to think that we can do this overnight and that we're going to come into Parliament for a first term and do tax reform straight away. So I think that resistance around new ideas, that's been one of the things that's been holding New Zealand back, and I think we need to get beyond it.
Can I ask you, and I know you're not going to, I do understand that there's a bit of nuance in going to these coalition negotiations with not presenting all your cards.
Yeah.
What would you be happy to just have a couple of policies? Like not those main 3 ones, a couple of policies into a coalition agreement or even a confidence of supply.
Yeah.
Where would you be at?
Yeah, I think so. We're going to put out some really clear bottom lines closer to the election, primarily for voters, for clear transparency on what we will take into those negotiations. I think there are some big meaty things that we can still achieve, maybe something around energy where, Labour and National recognise that energy sovereignty and affordability is really important, but we might be able to push them a little bit further on some of those policies. But yeah, I think if we can achieve a couple of really decent things in those first 3 years, that will be a huge achievement for us.
So for you, it's more important being part of the government, or what is it for you? Do you want to be part of a government, or do you want to be sort of sitting on the crossbenches? Do you want to be in opposition?
We want to be part of a government where we could further our objectives and our policies. If that's not going to be the case, if we're having to sort of compromise on everything and just be there for the votes, that's not something we would agree to. We'd rather be on the crossbenches or potentially in opposition if that's the case. Because I think we need to be really clear on what our values are in that first term, and that we're going to deliver something of value to Parliament so that we get to stay in 2029.
What policies that you can think of would National find attractive?
I think lots around our innovation policy. That's about growing the economy and making sure that we invest in the right things that are going to grow this economy, create higher wage jobs, get more of our young people to stay and build their careers here. It's also around tackling competition to bring prices down for everyday Kiwis. I think there are some really clear things that need to happen in that space, and for whatever reason, this government and governments before that have hesitated to take action. But it's very clear from the reports from the OECD and even Treasury here what we need to do to grow our economy by investing in innovation and tackling competition.
So you'd be happy to go into, for example, some sort of relationship with National with their innovation policy and whatever else your bottom line is.
That, and I think the other thing to consider is what other minor parties are putting on the table. So obviously it's just probably not going to be a 2-party coalition. If there are things there that are really contrary to what we believe, so things like the Gender Definitions Bill, which we don't believe is a good piece of legislation, the Treaty Principles Bill, for the same reason, we wouldn't agree to that. And so we'd either have to go into a confidence of supply arrangement or walk away completely.
In that situation, so you're not, even with those sort of policies, you're not completely ruling out that would be a confidence of supply, rather than because in any sort of coalition government or confidence of supply, there's always going to be dead rats to swallow.
Yeah.
But are you prepared to swallow dead rats?
It depends what they are. I think if it's something that is really contrary to where we think New Zealand needs to go, that's something that we will walk away from. So it'll be interesting to see what the other parties put on the table in the lead up to the election. I think that will make it clearer. For example, New Zealand First wanting to spend $1 billion on oil and gas exploration, that's not something we're going to agree to support in our first term.
So you wouldn't. So, for example, if National and New Zealand First were looking to form a coalition together, that would be something that you would walk away from, even a confidence in supply, or would you go in a confidence supply there?
I think we're going to make this all really clear a bit closer to the election. I think at this point in time it's a little bit far out, but I think potentially that is something that we would walk away from.
You would have talked to a lot of people. Who votes? Who's your voter base, or your supporters?
Yeah. Well, we've obviously heard anecdotally that people come from across the political spectrum. A lot of former National voters that are really frustrated at the lack of progress on environmental issues this current term, and a lot of the Green supporters that were perhaps more of the James Shaw ilk that feel they don't really align with that party anymore. It was interesting to see the recent Talbot Mills poll, because that dug a bit deeper into where our voters are coming from. So it's not just anecdotal, there was some data there. And that validated that. I think the largest portion was actually from National. And then obviously our former supporters, and then Labour was the next one. So I think it validates what we're hearing on the ground.
Do you expect Prime Minister Christopher Luxon's comments from Monday to have an impact on your support?
We've actually had a lot of really positive comments and messages. I've had in particular lots of people who have voted National in the past messaging us, emailing to say they're really frustrated and annoyed to hear Christopher Luxon's comment, because they think it's closed-minded and they'd like to see us work with National. So I think if anything, we've actually seen a boost in support. Our membership numbers and our volunteers always tend to get a bit of an uptick when our polling goes up, and we saw the same thing actually this week.
Have you met anyone from National? Like, have you been having any discussions?
Not formal discussions.
Would you meet Simeon Brown?
Yeah, definitely. I've been on a lot of panels with the likes of Simeon. Mainly Simeon actually, because it's been a lot of energy related panels that we've been speaking on together. Paul Goldsmith as well, he's been on a few panels with me. So yeah, I've met and chatted to a lot of them. And it would be great to have proper discussion now that we're getting closer to the election.
Can I just ask you about Gareth Morgan's? Have you had much to do with Gareth Morgan?
I've never met him or spoken to him. He fully stepped back from the party after the 2017 election. He doesn't fund it, he's not involved in any way. It's only been recently that he started to write some commentary. So my understanding was that he didn't really want to be involved anymore.
He was saying, for the sort of short and medium term longevity of the party, that you need to stay on the crossbenches, give the ruling government your confidence vote, and be free to promote and vote on legislation. What did you make of those comments?
I thought it was totally fair, and I think that could be a really good outcome for us. We're keeping all of those options on the table when it comes to negotiations. I think the flip side of that is that some of our voters would love to see us in a coalition government, because we'd probably have more chance at getting some of our ideas across the line rather than necessarily just supporting on the legislation of other parties. So there's pros and cons to each, and we'll have to just see what the major party in particular is willing to give us, and where they want to take the direction of the country.
In terms of the super age and the superannuation large bill that's coming our way, do you want to raise the retirement age?
So again, I think there's pros and cons of each. Raising the age is challenging for those that work in really manual jobs or people who have shorter life expectancies. So if that can be managed with raising the age, then that's a possibility. We would like to see us move towards compulsory KiwiSaver. I think it's a really important step as part of the superannuation conversation, because we need to support New Zealanders to have their own retirement savings if we're going to make any changes, whether that's means testing or raising the age. So we align with National actually very much on that. They want to move to compulsory KiwiSaver quite soon. And I think as part of that, we then look at what is more fair, whether raising the age or means testing. But it's clear that something needs to be done.
When it comes to your health policy, can you give me a bit of information? Our readers are really interested in this. What's your plan for training, hiring grads, and funding the health sector?
Yeah, this is a big topic, and we will have a full health policy coming out in the next month or so. I guess where we come at these big issues from is always how do we tackle the systemic problems? So we have a big focus on prevention. What are the big public health initiatives that mean we will have a healthier population that's putting less pressure on our entire health system? And then how do we fund primary care better so that our hospitals are not overloaded? So I won't be able to go into the full details of all our policy because we haven't released it yet, but that is the focus for us. It's prevention, primary care, and making sure that those funding models are adequately there to support support resourcing for those different communities. The workforce is a big issue as well. There's never enough money for health, and I think that's why having a good, productive, innovative economy is also a critical part of the puzzle. Because if we're not growing our economy, we're going to have to make harder and harder trade-off decisions around hospitals versus schools versus superannuation.
And on your crime policy around the youth court age, that I think I saw it was in line with developmental science there. I mean, what age is that?
So previously we had 25, that had been a former policy. We're re-looking at that evidence again, so we haven't put out an updated version of that policy yet.
Do you expect it to be lower?
Yeah, I think it probably will be lower. I think that there's a lot of sort of newer ways of looking at people with mental health and drug addictions, the sort of drug and alcohol courts and things like that, where there's less of a focus on punishment and more on rehabilitation, because that's what we know keeps people out of the system, is more likely to keep them out of the prison system, which ultimately costs the taxpayer less. So that's what we're interested in, is how do we support young people who are genuinely struggling, not to just send them into a life imprisonment, life of crime, but actually how do we get them to be engaging, meaningful contributors to society.
Just switching tack, can you tell me about a little bit about you? How did your upbringing and your heritage influence your politics today?
That's a good question. I come from quite a multicultural background, so I'm half Chinese and half Pākehā European, but my Chinese family grew up in Fiji, so we sort of have this, I guess, Pacifica connection as well, and yeah, I feel like we were always surrounded by lots of different kinds of people from different walks of life, whether they were Fijian, Indian, Chinese, European. So I think that has shaped my view that different perspectives are really valuable, and that coming at a particular problem from one perspective all the time is not a useful approach. And I've seen that in my business career as well, that the more diversity that you have of people in an organisation, the better decisions you make. And I think it's a real shame that in politics we have this view that if you have sort of one team with one ideology in power, then they're going to have all the answers to everything. I just don't think that that's the case.
How have you found politics? It's been quite a jump into the deep end here.
I've really enjoyed it, to be honest. I know it's pretty intense, and I don't think I've ever worked this hard in my life, but it's extremely rewarding, obviously, getting out and chatting to the Kiwis about what they want for their future. And, I think that the potential to have huge impact is extremely motivating.
It can also be quite brutal.
It can be brutal, and I can't lie, some of the I guess unnecessarily superficial jabs from, it's mainly not so much from the other politicians so far, but I guess voters from other parts of the political spectrum. That's hard, and we want to, when we're trying to be constructive, not to get dragged down into that mudslinging is tough.
When you applied for, did you actually apply for a Seek ad?
I didn't see it on Seek, but they did advertise it on Seek. I got the supporters newsletter, so I had voted for the party in the past and was on their mailing list, heard about it that way.
Can I just, what were your voting habits?
I voted right across the political spectrum. I have voted for the two main parties, and some minor parties as well. So yeah, it's been broad. I think I have always been interested, I have said this previously in interviews, that John Key government where he worked with the Greens into Party Māori, I look at that and just think that's so far-fetched today in politics, but there were a lot of really good things to come out of that, And if we could get that to that more open-minded approach to MMP, I think that would be really good for New Zealand.
Were you going for any other jobs at the same time, or were you?
No, so I was working at KPMG at the time, and I was definitely feeling frustrated at this. I was working in sustainability and climate consulting, and I was very frustrated at the change in direction in the government around climate legislation and what that meant for the business community, and hearing directly from CEOs that they were almost ready to push the button on, big investments that are going to change their business models and decarbonise, but that sudden change in direction made them hesitate. So I certainly was thinking a bit about where else I could have impact, and whether that meant going into politics, whether that was local government or doing something like this. So it was good timing, I think, that role came up. I applied not really thinking I was going to get it. I guess I applied and I thought, well, at least this will be a good experience to understand more of what politics might be like in case I want to go into that one day. But yeah, in the end, I found myself in this seat.
Just for clarification, when you were saying before, if you were, for example, to go into the negotiation room, Nationals there, they've said we're with, I think you gave the example of the oil and gas $1 billion fund. If you were to walk in there, Nationals say, I want you to be a confidence and supply partner. I've got a coalition with New Zealand First, we've got $1 billion fund for oil and gas. What happens?
We will put those bottom lines out. I think it's too early for us to absolutely say that here. I can't see us agreeing to that at this point in time. That is, I think, a real waste of $1 billion of taxpayer money. And private investment is not looking to invest in fossil fuels in New Zealand. There are so many better ways that we can do that. I guess what I would put back to them is we see such huge potential in renewable energy in New Zealand, and I think National does as well. How could we better spend that $1 billion to achieve the same outcome, which is energy security and sovereignty here in New Zealand, but not do that through locking ourselves into more fossil fuels?
Are there any policies on the left that you don't agree with?
We disagree with a lot of the Greens' tax policy. I understand what they're trying to achieve. I don't think a wealth tax is going to be good for New Zealand. We think that a land tax is more effective because we are able to tax wealth in a way through people that own really expensive property. But A, we don't have the capital flight, and B, we want to incentivise people to grow their wealth. That's part of a good functioning, market-based economy. And I think a wealth tax sends the message that we don't want people to do that. With the land tax, if you don't own property, you might even get a tax cut under our tax policy. So you could be a business owner, an investor that invests in businesses and funds and infrastructure, and be better off under our tax policy. I think getting into Parliament in any shape or form is better than not. So we would rather be in opposition than not be there at all. I think it gives us, the might of the parliamentary service to support us to work towards getting elected into government in a future term. It gives us an opportunity to have more say in the public arena and shape the conversation and the narrative, which is in the media. So there's huge gains to be had even in opposition. It's not our first choice, but we'll certainly take that over working from the outside and relying completely on volunteers and donations to keep the party going.
I think we might leave it there, but thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome, thank you.